Welcome to Finding Hope, the End to Suffering. Hosted by psychologist, author, and co-founder of the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership, Dr. Barry Weinhold, with national radio host, award-winning producer, and inspirational speaker, Patricia Raskin.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our wonderful podcast series, which is Finding Hope, the End to Suffering. And I'm Patricia Raskin. I'm co-hosting it with Barry Weinhold, who is the creator of this incredible podcast. Hi, Barry. How are you?
Hi, Patricia. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, so how was your week?
Well, pretty good. I got to do some fishing for the first time and had unbelievably gorgeous day. 70 degrees, not a cloud in the sky, a little breeze to keep it from getting warm, and the fish were biting. I had a great day, and so
very healing. Talk about healing, right?
I've been waiting for the weather to change so I could do that, and I got a break on Thursday and Friday, and so I took advantage of it.
Right, and I am visiting my daughter.
Happy Mother's
Day. We walked in the park for a long time and had a wonderful lunch, and that was very healing. Just the trees and watching people run and walk again. It was, it was really nice. A lot of people were out. Very pretty.
We're getting good response to the podcast. I had an email from a fellow, and he was into Black Lives Matter and talked about the suffering that many Black people have had. And he said he wanted a comment from me. And I said, about racism in this country. And I said, well, I think there is racism in this country, and it will be gone when every one of us will consider George Floyd as our brother.
That's a great comment.
Yeah. And I think that's true. I mean, I think we have to really realize that we're all brothers and sisters in this together. And I mean, there's a lot of suffering in the world, and this show is focusing on mostly individuals that suffered, and obviously groups have suffered from oppression and racism and other kinds of maladies over the years. And we try our best on this show to really help people see that suffering is just something that they can get through, and there is life after suffering. And our guests often will tell very incredible stories about how they turned their life around. And
Barry, you've written 75 books on this subject, plus having a PhD and all the other things you've done. So, I mean, you've seen a lot.
Yeah. Well, our guest today is actually a healer. So there is a concept in the healing profession called the wounded healer. And it's a very important concept, I think, because everyone who turns out to be a healer has had some wounding in their life, has had some suffering. And many times the fact that they've been through that suffering makes them a much more powerful healer. And I think you'll hear that today or in our interview with Eric Watson, because his suffering turned around, and he's now working as a counselor in the field, and I'll let him tell all about that. But I think that whole idea of the wounded healer is an important one in anyone who's in any kind of the health professions, helping professions, because we all have had these kind of tragedies, we've had this suffering, we've had this trauma in our life, but we've overcome it in some way. And that's the positive side that I want to be able to really emphasize.
One of the things I've been reading about, Barry, and I'd love your comments on this, is the whole idea of attachment styles. People who've been wounded in relationships, they're avoidant, or they're dismissive, or they are
ambivalent, and there's the disorganized or the other.
And I've been finding that very interesting. I don't know how much we bring that in here, but it does help to explain behavior.
Yeah, I can bring that in at some point. Today, I'd like to focus a little bit more on, again, an incident in my life, and also maybe if you have an incident in your life where you suffered some and were able to overcome that suffering and make something positive out of it. So I'll be able to start with one that fits for me. I as a teenager, was very depressed and suicidal. I had suicidal thoughts. I spent a lot of time alone in my room, just kind of ruminating about my life and who I was, and I didn't have very good feelings about who I was. And I had this thought, this recurring thought, that I would not live to be 21. That
Wow.
something would happen to me. Either I'd commit suicide, or I would get killed in an automobile accident, or something would happen bad that I wouldn't make it to 21. And it was a recurring thought, and not a very pleasant one, of course. But between my junior and senior year in high school, something miraculous happened. Two young men visited me one summer evening, and they were from a neighboring city, and they were from the chapter of DMLA, which is a fraternal organization for men that's sponsored by the Masons. My uncle was a Mason, and he was the one who recommended me. I didn't know any of these people, and I had really not traveled to the city very often, but I decided to sign up, and it changed my life, because when I got into this group, and the support that I had from the other men in that group was just incredible. And I ended up becoming the head of the organization at one point, about 2 years later. And so it just opened me up, and opened me up to service, because it was a service organization. So I think it had a lot to do with my initial idea of going to into this profession. And teen suicide has been is an issue that I've been obviously focused on, that as a result of my experience. And the place where I live in, surrounding county outside of Colorado Springs, has one of the highest teen suicide rates in the country. And there's been a number of people locally that have focused on how to overcome that.
Yeah, and I teach a lot of webinars on overcoming burnout, suicide prevention, and it's gone up since COVID, Barry. I mean, it's gone up.
It has, although interestingly, in El Paso County, there were only 3 COVID deaths in that teen group from 10 to 19, I think it is. And at the same time, there were 18 teen suicides. And I looked up the statistics, and last year there were 177, not teen suicides, but suicides in the general population in this county. And then there were 370 COVID deaths. So about half of the, not quite half of the deaths of the people for suicide, is what we talk about and spend all our time focusing on with the COVID crisis.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I see that I think is a little bit scary is that we don't always see it. In fact, there have been so many suicides where people just had no idea, because people hide it well.
They do.
You know, they learn how to take that behavior, and that's the hard part, is how do you pick up those clues?
So we have on the crawler on the bottom the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, or it's Lifeline, as it's called. And I mean, if there's anybody in our audience who has any kind of suicidal thoughts, please call that hotline or that Lifeline and talk to somebody about it, because sometimes, you know, we can get into our own thoughts and get lost in them. And if we have somebody you can bounce them off of and talk to, sometimes we can pull ourselves out of it. So
absolutely.
Absolutely.
If we catch it early enough. But it's a tough one. And that's why, you know, when I do a lot of these webinars, I say to managers and leaders, look for little clues, those little changes, even if it's, you know, I'm usually quiet and now I'm outgoing, or I'm not usually agitated and now I am. You know, look for those little signals. That starts to uncover it a little bit.
And suicide seems to affect men more than women. And also, what's different is that men never talk about it. They do it. Women will think about it and talk about it, and maybe still do it, but they do reach out usually. Men don't as much. So the men in our audience, please reach out if you have any kind of depression or suicidal thoughts. My book, Get Real, the hazards of living out of your false self, talks about two kinds of false selves. The one of them is the inflated one we've talked about before, which is about narcissism, there's a lot of that around. But the other side of the false self is the deflated false self, which is depressed, suicidal, often a victim, feeling like a victim, and not feeling very good about themselves, those people. So I've written quite a bit about that in that book. And I'm also, there's been a big increase in the COVID crisis of conflict between couples. And so I've decided that I needed to write a book about that. So I've written a book called Intimate Combat. The subtitle is Conflict Resolution for Couples. And in that book, I'm talking about how couples who, and in my experience, and I've worked a lot with couples in my practice, and the two things that came out of that for me and the people that we saw were almost always people who were we were the last resort. When my wife and I saw them and a couple, we did co-counseling with couples. And so two things were common in all the couples, and most of them were on their way to sign the divorce papers, and somebody said, gee, go talk to Barry and Janae first before you do that. And the two things were that they didn't understand that the conflicts they were having were actually repeats of conflicts they had, unresolved conflicts they'd had early in their life. And so the whole idea of understanding that whatever you're dealing with now as a conflict has roots somewhere else. And when we began to see that, couples changed their focus and they became more compassionate towards you. And the other thing we found was that they didn't have skills. And so basically we taught them the skills. So anyway, it's a book that is almost like a workbook. And next month I'll talk more about it because it'll be published. It's in the final edits right now.
Great. I think that's great. It's so important to have these skills. And, hopefully during COVID, people are learning how to communicate more, but sometimes they're not.
Well, actually,
certainly an opportunity because we have more time.
Yeah. In fact, the COVID forced people to have more contact. And with more contact came more conflict. And it really brought people up against the idea that they didn't really have good skills for handling those conflicts. And oftentimes, as a result, they would escalate into violence. When people got triggered by the other person's whatever they were saying in the conflict, and then they became violent because they didn't have good skills but this book actually I've like 5 worksheets that couples can use. They can just take out the worksheets and it'll take them step by step through any conflict that they have.
Oh, that's great.
And so it's a really
that's important.
A lot of good skill building in the book itself, as well as helping people understand how things will bleed through from the past. If we didn't get it resolved somewhere in our past, it's going to show up again.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that, and when they're in the middle.
Well, and I think that's why you do this show, so that other people can tell their stories about that and how they've gotten through it, how things have come up from the past, and how they work through them.
Yeah. So I think maybe we ought to bring in our guest for this month and interview him. He's a man that I've known for about 5 years. He was a member of my men's group for a while, and I came to know him also. He helped out in a workshop that I did where he was the music director. He's has his own karaoke machine and business, and spent the workshop involved helping using music to help you understand more about some of the things in your life that you maybe have left behind and want to catch up with. So Eric Watson will.
All right. Hello, Eric.
Hi. Good to see Eric.
I think Eric's on mute.
Yeah. We'll get Eric.
here.
Good.
Good
Nice
to see you, and
Good.
good to see you again. I talk on the phone with you, but I haven't had a chance to see you in person for a while. And so give us a sort of a thumbnail sketch of what you're up to these days. And I know that you've been through a lot in your life. How old are you right now, if I might ask?
I'm 28 currently.
Yeah, you just turned 28 not too long ago, right?
September, so I've been 28 for a little bit.
Yeah, right. Well, you're still a young guy in my eyes, and you've done a tremendous amount in that amount of time. So bring us up to date a little bit. Then we'll dig in the interview about the things that the suffering you had to work your way through and how you did that.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And I'm working quite a bit. So I work with adolescents from the ages of 13 to 17, boys and girls, in addiction treatment. I also co-occurring disorders. So I'm working with other stuff too, and integrated programs that I work for. Then I also work with adult men on my days off. So I work every day. And on top of that, I mean, I've been spending quality time with my lady, and I've been getting out when I can, and I do some singing here and there, lots of video games, which have been fun for me lately. But other than that, yeah, I mean, mostly work is probably where I get most of my fill from, if I have to say.
Well, I know you didn't mention this, but I know you're itching to get rolling on your mountain climbing, because he's a great mountain climber.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as it gets warmer out and I can find some and prioritize some time aside, I really like to. It's a different world up at altitude. And I think when I'm in the mountains, my problems here just seem smaller.
So I was going to ask you, is that one of the places where you find hope, Eric, is when you're mountain climbing?
Yeah, I'd say hope, and I'd also say maybe enlightenment. I guess it's gives me a lens as to what's really important, and care a little less about things that aren't so important. So that's what I feel when I'm there. So.
And when you're working with patients, with clients, patients, what are some things that you do to help give them some hope?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, I'd love to think that I'm giving all of that hope, and I think that I get that feedback from my clients. And so I find some way to relate to them, as in a professional manner as possible. Obviously I don't want to tell them my whole life story. That may be inappropriate to some degree, but when it's appropriate, I get some self-disclosure, and also I think using some humor to help lighten maybe whatever it is that we're talking about, in an effort to build some kind of rapport. But then just amplify what's possible in a way that is enthusiastic and makes it sound exciting, right? Like, I might say something like, I don't know if you're ready for this, bud, but this is some Jedi level stuff right here. So, and whatever I gotta say, I want to make recovery and health like cool. It's cool to be in recovery. It's cool to be sick.
Barry, how important is it to role model all this? To kind of walk the talk and role model it for the people you're working with.
In the addictions field, it's extremely important. And there's really a lot of the people who've gone through recovery themselves are eager to give back, and so sometimes telling their story when it's appropriate and being a role model of I've been there, done that is really important to help these people when they see you who've made it through the dark night of the soul. They pay more attention to you instead of just somebody who's just sort of getting into this profession because you want to help people. So it's a much, and you would agree, I'm sure, Eric, that that's a real big important part of what work you do.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, I think to an extent, I mean, I use it whenever I can. And I think there are also lots of other ways that one could find a way to relate, or at least make a client feel connected to you in some way, some part of you.
One of the other great ways you told me is that you use your music with some of your.
Yeah.
Talk about that a minute. What do you do?
Sure. So right now, you did mention that I am a karaoke host, and I've done that in bars, and I do parties and stuff like that. And so I don't have any use for that. At least I haven't for the last year or so. And I've been leaving all of my equipment at work and doing karaoke with the kids as like a group. So, there are intentions set, and there's somewhat of a structure to it. But, they're thinking about these things as they go through the activity of how can I have fun, and amplifying the fact that everyone in this room is sober right now. And, just reflecting that back to them and allowing them to express themselves in whichever way.
Good.
My question, and it's for Barry too, and Eric, is that, we talked about how you give people hope, but how do we as frontline people in health, Barry, when you talk to your clients and the same thing for you, Eric, how do you keep yourself, finding hope when you're hearing a very tough story or somebody's going through something really difficult? How do you do this for yourself?
You want to say something about that, Eric?
Sure. And I would love to be able to just like teach that to people, like where they, because it's, and sometimes I have some success with that because, I some ways I feel lucky that I'm able to do that for myself. And I guess how I do that is, I found that perception is so subjective, and I can't think of a moment. If I'm thinking back of like the hardest moments or the most suffering I've ever been through, I can tell you without a doubt, I could list 10 things that, were good about those moments, even in grief, in loss, or in heartbreak. There is a way we can really change our affect by just giving attention to what is things that I'm grateful for, things that I find joy from. And I guess I just have learned to make that my default setting because I've reinforced it enough times.
Let me say a little bit about that too, because in my professional career at the university, I worked with pre-service people who were entering the helping profession as counselors. But since then, I've been working mostly with established professionals. And the biggest problem that I've run into with mental health, mostly mental health, but also mostly health professionals, is they just don't take good care of themselves. And that's so important. And they're so of course, they're so invested in helping their clients or their patients, but there has to be a balance, and they have to be able to take care of themselves as well, or otherwise they burn out. And I've seen a lot of burnout in people because of that they just haven't taken the time to take better care of themselves. And I have really focused on that in my life. I spend a good deal of my time taking care of myself when I'm not working with clients.
Yeah. And we're going to talk more about that in our next segment.
Yeah.
When we come back with Eric, and we'll be talking to Barry and Eric. And again, you're listening to Finding Hope, The End to Suffering, an incredible podcast that Barry Weinhold has created, and bringing on amazing people who share their stories.
This episode was brought to you by the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership. Find out more about these resources at weinholds.org. Dr. Weinhold is the author or co-author of 75 books on psychology, including his latest book, Get Real, The Hazards of Living Out of Your False Self, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and more. Patricia Raskin is the host of the nationally recognized program, The Patricia Raskin Positive Living Show, and is currently heard on voiceamerica.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. New episodes of Finding Hope, The End to Suffering can be found every Wednesday. If you like the show, please leave a review and give us a rating.